right, Albie, let's get right to Joe Bye-Bye Miss American Pie. Right now. All right. I will answer the question. By the way, no, I won't forget it. I was going to say answer the question because Justin left a question on the chat asking if we tip the mailman on today's KMS show. Cullinan said he never has ever. And we have tipped our mailman before, but I don't know if we've tipped this mailman. But
we do whenever we can afford to,
or when we or when we remember.
Right.
So our last guy we used to, but that is so I am pro tipping of the mailman. Yes,
I'm pro tipping everybody that you can.
We're pretty good tippers. I would say that is true. But so yeah, I mean, what's worse if you don't tip him? Like Cullinan has no idea, has been stiffing him for a decade. Or if you know you're supposed to, but you've missed your opportunities. But that's been it. We've been effing freaking busy. And you know what? F you. I make up for it in carbon credits.
They're
like
also,
John Kerry, I make up for it by over-tipping other people, too, okay?
They also are not supposed to accept gifts like over a certain amount. But
God,
I've never
Alice.
known one to turn it down either. So, and I also think, like, if you give them too little money, it looks worse, too. Because it's like, if you give them $20... and like all the other neighbors gave 100, then you're showing that you know you're supposed to tip, but you're being cheap. So it's like almost worse than just not tipping it all.
Alice, being somebody who has been tipped for a living before, that there are tippers and there are non-tippers. It is a very binary world. And if you're somebody who stiffs, then you are marked as somebody who stiffs. You're somebody who.
But mailmen don't live on tips. I think that's different than.
Sure, but they quite enjoy them.
They're not making like a tipped wage.
They quite enjoy them.
Right. No, I'm pro tipping mailmen. We have tipped mailmen in the past.
All right. So then I want to get to Joe Biden today. Joe Biden gave what was supposed to be a speech about inflation and his plan to take it down. Once again, he did the speech from the fake set that this administration has made up. In a room in the old executive office building, which is it's literally a set with fake windows, with fake everything. It's bizarre. They do it because they claim like the AV guy doesn't want to have to install and deinstall stuff from the Oval Office, all the teleprompters, whatever. But that seems odd to me that they would really cater to the AV guy who's sick of having to, use duct tape and duct tape down the wires. Well, and they can have all the
media in there. There's like space for an audience or whatever, so they can have everybody in there. That's what they say. But I have never seen this before. This like president being on a set thing. This is new for Biden, right? Did Trump ever go on the pretend White House set?
No,
like, it's weird,
the thing
right?
is it for somebody who much of the country thinks is being overhandled because he's addled. This just feeds right into that. Right. So he probably shouldn't be that. It doesn't really matter. He mangled some stuff regardless.
And I agree with what Chairman Powell said last week, that the number one threat is the strength, and that strength that we built is inflation.
Yeah. Okay. But there were a couple of notable things, and this is where I think the communication shop has to get better. I love it. But he takes questions at the end of these things, and he punches himself into a corner a lot of times. So listen to this meander into really the takeaway quote of the day.
I have conversations almost every day. Well, that's an exaggeration. At least twice a week with one of my European counterparts, heads of state. And how can we help them, in fact, wean themselves off of Russian oil because they're so totally dependent. So we're working like the devil to help them transition, because as long as Russia's able to make money selling oil, they're going to continue to be able to do the bad things they're doing. So there's a lot. It's really complicated. I'm not suggesting American people can't understand it. They understand it, but they have, they're working 8-10 hours a day just to put food on the table. And so I think what's happened is we have, in a sense, I never expected, let me say this carefully. I never expected the Ultra MAGA Republicans who seem to control the Republican Party now to have been able to control the Republican Party. I never anticipated that happening.
So the economic woes, and the inflation is because of MAGA as he caroms from Russia in global events.
Mm-hmm.
And this coincides with talking points that he's been using the last couple of days, Ultra MAGA, Super MAGA Congress. So in other words, this inflation is a matter of the Republicans
not letting him.
Right, because they're Super MAGA. So in other words,
Ultra
it's
MAGA.
Trumpism
Right.
that's causing all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He says, which is worth a shot, I guess.
Is Joe Manchin part of Ultra MAGA?
I guess it's worth a shot. Blame the side not in power. That is great. Why are you guys failing at every economic avenue we come to? The minority party.
And not to mention every suggestion that Biden and the Democrats come up with how to fight inflation or how to fight high gas prices literally makes it worse. Like, if we have to provide oil for Germany, also, I presume he's talking about Germany right now because
Right.
that's probably the biggest state that's totally dependent on Russian oil. If we have to help them get off their oil dependency, that creates more demand for oil out of the same oil that we're trying to buy oil from. So that causes prices to go up. His hijinks with the strategic oil reserves that are leading us now to have to buy oil to, fill up the strategic oil reserves again. That's caused more demand for oil. That's going to cause the oil prices to rise again. This is a situation that's compounded by everything they do. People in Congress, Democrats in Congress, have floated the idea of prepaid gas cards to send out to the American people. That would create more demand for gas and cause the prices to go up also. I mean, all of their ideas, when they say they're going to fight inflation and they're like, we're going to fight inflation by giving more money to parents to pay for childcare. We're going to fight inflation by forgiving student loans. Every answer that they have to, quote, fight inflation is just to give people more money, which causes inflation.
Yes.
It causes increased demand for stuff that already there's more demand for the stuff than the supply chain is able to get to them. That's the whole problem.
But they don't. It's like a pit bull with a child or small dog in its mouth. They never relinquish this grip on this messaging, and they stick to it. So yes, we have to. They were trying to tell us that Build Back Better would curb inflation because people would have the ability to pay for stuff. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. It's craziness. And if they wanted to,
well, they are saying. I guess to play devil's advocate, I think what they would say would be that it helps families deal with the impacts of inflation.
They said that, but they also said that it would help curb inflation.
Right, but by curb inflation, they mean make inflation not feel so bad for
That's
people.
not what they said.
No, I know, but that's like what I think they're driving at. But the problem is, like, while that is, it's just like the strategic oil reserves thing, or just like the stimulus, or just like the child tax credit payments and everything else. Like, you put the money in people's hands, and yes, it makes the inflation not feel so bad right this minute. But the thing about markets is that then they adjust. And they adjust by the prices going up in order to meet the increase in demand that people have to properly distribute the goods to the people who are willing to pay the highest price for them. That's what the markets do. So that just causes more inflation. And it was interesting to watch at the beginning when they were like, it's transitory. And they were saying like, well, it's just in certain sectors. The prices haven't gone up on everything. It's just used cars. It's just this. It's just that, right? But the thing is that when you give people a bunch more money, you will see that weird inflation in like one sector but not another, because it creates like weird pockets of demand. When you hand people extra money, it creates unexpected demand overall in the economy. And you can't really predict where people are going to choose to spend that extra money. But if they all decide to go buy a used car, then it's going to cause the prices of used cars to go up. But the thing is, you're going to get that demand somewhere because you gave people the money. So it almost doesn't matter which sector it's in. You've put the demand into people's hands, the potential to buy stuff in a way that's going to cause inflation somewhere. You just aren't sure where until they actually decide to spend it. So every suggestion that they have will make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's
and
incredible
there's
to me.
So many factors to part of the why this demand is creating log jams, And, one reason is obviously suddenly everybody wants to get whatever, the new power widget from Tesla at the same time. And Tesla, of course, produced fewer of those during the COVID because nobody was doing anything. And now they don't have, the Chinese who make some of the parts are locked in their villages and starving to death. And so there's supply chain problems, etc. The problem with Biden's economic agenda is that it doesn't take into account any of the harsh realities out in the world, and in fact uses them to justify the passage of his agenda.
Right. See, the reason inflation's bad is because we didn't spend enough money. We didn't pass Build Back Better. We didn't pass like this crazy huge social safety net that I wanted to pass for people. We didn't spend money on the human infrastructure of, whatever, healthcare people
Right.
or stupid things that were in Build Back Better, right?
And so here's another one. That I thought was bizarre. I did see a couple of people write about this, but this is Biden during the scrum. This is one of the reasons he shouldn't do this. But just politically for them, just let the Republicans keep saying the guy's lost his mind and shuffle him out of there, because sometimes he answers honestly.
Do you support any restrictions on abortion, or what limits do you believe there
Not
should
gonna
be as
respond to
the
anything
Senate is
because I
making that
want
up?
the story to be about inflation.
I'm not going to respond to anything because I want the story to be about inflation. And you never hear somebody, obviously that's the strategy. That's what they were working on
Right.
all morning before he went out there with Ron Klain and Jen Psaki and the whole team got together and talked about this.
Yeah, I'm sure he's just repeating the words that they told him. Now,
Yes.
listen, sir, you're not going to answer anything because we want the story to be about inflation. And so
Exactly.
he's parroting back the words.
Right. And so he doesn't answer about abortion, which is an interesting thing considering you would think that his base would want to hear something about Roe v. Wade. But he's not going to, as he tells you, because the political, marksmanship provides that he stay away, sidestep that, so that they can work on this particular policy thing that is a more attends to more broad interest.
Well, right. And I'm sure they've seen the polling, too, the same
Right.
polling that we've talked about where, for all that I think this was an attempt to move the needle on the midterms, it really hasn't. That
Right.
people are concerned enough about, like, for example, not being able to feed their babies that the abortion debate isn't really register, or what Ron DeSantis is doing in the Florida public schools isn't registering on their like top 10 list of things to worry about. They're worried about like whether their paycheck is going to cover groceries next month. That's so much more pressing. And finally, I feel like the baby formula story is getting some attention, but I can't imagine what parents are going through right now who can't feed their babies. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of breastfeeding because you avoid all the issues like this. But, a bunch of people, for a variety of reasons, can't.
Do you remember how stressed you were, though, when the tap was running dry, essentially? Right?
Right.
And
When
you
it
were
was
panicking, and you were sad, and you were upset. You felt like that you were failing as a mother. Your very maternal role was not being met. It was very stressful for you.
Right. And especially when our older kids who were in daycare a lot, before I stopped working outside the home, towards the end of the year that you're supposed to keep breastfeeding them, like you say, it's very difficult to keep up with the nutritional demands of an almost 1-year-old through breastfeeding when you're spending a lot of time at work. Even if your work is super generous about like time for pumping and all that stuff, like it's close to impossible. And so we did end up having to supplement with formula as especially our oldest got older. And that was like one of the most stressful times of my whole life, is like being worried and afraid about not being able to feed your child. That's like the most visceral things. And I think one of the things that people that people who aren't parents don't get, like that not being able to get your kid to eat or to keep food down or whatever it is, like not being able to feed your child, like just how at some weird lizard brain level upsetting that is.
Right. And of course, But for us, we had a choice. We always had to. We could, if the worst it came to worst, we could fall back
there
on
was
formula.
in the
Right.
store.
But now, a lot of moms who are using formula can't breastfeed for some reason. It's just not taking or whatever. And
Right.
so they have nothing. So I saw a bunch of people posting, some of whom I think we know, saying that they made their own formula.
Right, but those, and so I assume there's a variety of recipes out there, but like some of the ones that I've seen going around that involve like condensed milk and corn syrup, that is not nutrition for a baby. That's not, it's just not. I mean, like, breast milk is obviously like the best thing for a baby, but they've spent a lot of time developing these formulas to mimic that nutrition as closely as possible. And you know, what's in stuff that you can mix from the store shelf, it's not the same thing. It's just not. And
well, but Alice, the fact is, we're in the United States of America, and we're trying to find home brews to feed infants because we're out of stuff.
right.
It's pretty damn remarkable.
Right, but there's like a conservative pediatrician that I follow on Twitter, and one of the things he said is like, if you're going to be a prepper, not depending on going to the store, you know, totally independent person, then you're going to have to be a person who's able to breastfeed. And that's like not fair because not everyone can, but that's just the reality because there's not a homemade solution for feeding babies that replicates that. There's just not. And I mean, there's been cases like, first of all, you know, hundreds of years ago, people breastfed for much longer because it was such a convenient way to feed children, and there really aren't good options like from nature. Like nature's provided the right option already, and there's not like really other alternatives found in nature, and it's very, very difficult to mimic that. Now, like, will your baby die if you do homemade formula? Probably not. Like, there's
Still,
probably
in fact, we shouldn't be in this place.
I know, it's a mess. It's absolutely terrible. And the fact that the White House hasn't been on top of this, and Jen Psaki had like nothing productive to say about this the other day and pointed people like to the FDA as though
well,
it's their
she's got a lengthy and meaty word convoy that she distributes and mobilizes, but it's just a whole bunch of words. I mean, I don't think that they really have answers. And so she goes right to the notebook, to the Trapper Keeper, and goes to the page on there being no more formula left in the country. But they also just don't. I don't think they know what to do. And I think they're also trying to. I think they don't really want to be starkly in the news cycle, standing next to the formula shortage, because they don't want to be associated with it. So she's trying to kind of dance around it and let it pass by.
Because what the answer basically boils down to is, this is outside our control. Check more stores. Hopefully you find some soon. Best of luck to you.
Right.
That's like the answer that there is. And that's a terrible and stressful answer for parents.
Yeah. So moving on to, unless you got something more here, or just the Supreme Court stuff for a second. I had forgotten about Chuck Schumer saying this a couple of months ago on the Capitol steps.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch. I want to tell you, Kavanaugh. You have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions. Wow, it almost sounds like the legislative branch is threatening the judicial branch.
Remember when the entire media establishment and the left and everybody else said that Sarah Palin was responsible for
Gabby Giffords,
a mass shooting because somebody that she was associated with once put a target symbol on some congressional maps?
Right. Yeah. So let's go to
like insanity.
So let's go to so this is an interesting thing that's happened here as far as this Roe v. Wade decision comes down. And I heard a couple of people, the folks from commentary, suggest last week that this could happen, and it really is happening. Now, I thought this would be happening in states and state legislatures, and it probably will. But this is now happening in high-profile media hits. So listen to this. This is a a convention of Mensa people for the ages. This is Beto O'Rourke with The View.
Once the kid is born, it's bye-bye, baby.
That's right.
But I do want to press further because you're a progressive hero. There are so many people around the country who admire you and your leadership. Do you believe in any limitations on abortion, whether it's the third trimester or up until even the final months, 9 months?
I think Roe versus Wade, which we should remind ourselves is still the law of the land today, is the reference point that I would look to. And the way I think I can best express this is that I trust women. We should all trust women to make their own decisions that are in their best interest for themselves, for their health care, and for their future. That's the way it's been literally my entire life. I'm 49 years old. I'll be 50 this year, but that's the way it should be going forward. But let me just finish this point super quickly. In Texas, under Greg Abbott's watch, 100 kids lost their lives last year in the CPS, Child Protective Services System in Texas, under the care and the custody of the state of Texas. If he cared about life, he would have cared about those kids, but he cares about political points and control and power over women's bodies.
And he loves his guns, too.
That's right. And the NRA.
We're going to have more with Beto O'Rourke when we come.
So, one, it's interesting that the governor of Texas now in charge of border protection. That's one thing. But here's my feeling. Was it border protection or child protection?
CPS, Child Protective Services.
Okay. Here's my thing. That's not a good place to be. Open-ended, late-term abortion. And that's what Beto's admitting. Well, leave it to the women. We leave it to the women. Well, the country supports first trimester, largely, anyway. Mm-hmm. After that, no, they don't. And for him to just leave it open-ended, I mean, it's made the discussion much more politically dangerous and unpopular for Democrats than Republicans.
Right. So the problem is for Democrats is that they've boxed themselves into the no restrictions ever position, which is like because, and I almost think it's because Roe versus Wade happened, right? And which, despite what Beto says, Roe versus Wade doesn't say just always trust women. Roe versus Wade says that states can't regulate pregnancies until the point of viability, which is much, much earlier than the third trimester. I mean, like, viability now is really like 22 weeks or something. But the idea that you just trust women at any point in pregnancy is totally fine is not in keeping with not only what the American people think, but what like the rest of the civilized world does. So because the position of Roe and the position of Democrats has now been just trust women to do whatever, Republicans have been put in the position to put forward like really almost insanely reasonable restrictions on abortion. Like the Mississippi law on abortion is like super reasonable. The one that the Supreme Court's ruling on, it's 15 weeks with medical exemptions after that, right? So like life of the mother after 15 weeks, of course, like severe fetal abnormality after 15 weeks, like, and anything goes before 15 weeks. That's not some like crazy right to life bill. That's like really moderate and really close to probably like the median voter. So when the Republicans take that position and the Democrats are forced into the position of saying then that's absolutely an unconscionable encroachment on women's rights and women absolutely need to be able to get abortions outside of those extremely modest limitations, it puts them into a very extreme position and, you know, where people disagree with them. And I think there are moderate Democrat commentators like Matt Iglesias wrote a whole blog about how they should take up as their position, like the European position, essentially, which is like somewhere between like 14 to 20
But the legislation that passed in Congress by Democrats is the absolute legislation.
Yeah.
It's open-ended. It's what Beto was talking about.
But if right now, I think probably Mitch McConnell put forward something that's like essentially the average of what goes on in Europe, which is basically like after the first trimester, they would kick and scream and claim that was like horrific and an assault on women's rights.
Right.
Which, I mean, like, personally, I'd like to see way more than that, but I'm not going to get what I want, but I'd be willing to take anything that reduces the number of abortions in this country. And I think that, like, Beto is sitting here arguing and like being unable to say that third trimester abortions are a horrific practice that really is just infanticide at that point. Like, what are we playing
Well,
at
but
here?
his feeling is if a woman says it, then it's fine.
Well, then why not after they're born too? Like, I just don't get really what the
maybe
difference
he's open-ended
is at that point.
Maybe he's willing to listen to you. All right, Dateline, somewhere I've been, Alice, that you haven't been. Dateline, Stanford University.
Okay.
How do you suppose this is going to compile? Stanford investigating noose found on campus as a hate crime. So immediately when I saw this, I thought to myself, okay, here we go. I have a feeling that what this is going to mean is Stanford investigating something that's not a noose found on campus. But here we go. Stanford. That's where all the people from Google go and Facebook. That's where all the smartest tech people in the world go. Stanford.
They don't seem like news people, really.
Correct. Stanford University, and this is in the Hill, and it's just so wonderful. It's so wonderful. People are so yearning. Now, you would think that you would actually have, we'll get to it, an important paragraph closer to the top, but no. Stanford University announced on Monday that it is investigating a noose found hanging near an undergraduate residence as a hate crime. My goodness. So if the noose is found hanging near an underground residence, that's meant to intimidate, obviously. A noose is a hateful representation of anti-black racism and violence, Stanford President Mark Tessier-Levine said in a statement to the school's community. It is deeply disturbing that someone would choose to inflict this repugnant symbol on our community. We are working in vigorous and committed ways to advance equity, inclusion, and belonging in our Stanford community. We have been making progress, but incidents like this one show how far we still have to go, he added. So now the Hill, of course, pastes his entire statement in there, essentially, to put some space between the lead, the headline, and the important factor. The noose was found on Sunday evening hanging from a tree near the undergraduate residence of Branner Hall, according to the school. Stanford said several ropes were apparently used for a student performance a few years ago and were left tied to the tree. With one found Sunday turned into a noose. Huh. I would like to see that. Who commits a hate crime by saying, you know what, I'm going to fashion a noose just to show these people. I need to find pre-installed ropes hanging from places and tie loops into the end of them. School officials said the noose was removed immediately after the Stanford University Department of Public Safety was notified about it, with the incident now being investigated as a hate crime. Oddly enough, they haven't given us a picture of this noose, which is one of 3 ropes put there for performances a few years ago. We cannot state strongly enough that a noose is a reprehensible symbol of anti-black racism and violence that will not be tolerated on our campus. As a community, we must stand united against such those yada yada. You hear how this is going. That's from the 2 vice provosts, whatever the freak that is. Stanford noted that nooses are potential nooses.
Potential nooses. What are potential nooses?
Have been discovered on its campus, including in November and in July of 2019.
They found a potential noose?
In November, yes, they found potential nooses, which is potentially racist, as a matter of fact. In November, the school received a report about 2 long cords hanging from a tree. I guess a long cord is a potential noose. Near a walking trail.
I mean, what is a potential noose?
But it said at the time it could not be certain whether the ropes were deliberately fashioned in the shape of nooses or part of an abandoned swing or rope ladder, given how long they had been hanging there. In July, a noose was also reportedly discovered near a residence hall on campus. So then the Hill tells us that they've removed the comments for this section because I assume the white supremacists are celebrating in them. But just think, this starts with Stanford University announced on Monday that it is investigating a noose found hanging near an undergraduate residence as a hate crime. It doesn't get to us to tell us that, just you should know, by the way, that the noose has been hanging there for years as part of a performance.
So I wasn't alive when the KKK was active. But
you are now.
But I assume that when they targeted somebody, it was a little clearer cut and like easier to tell that they'd been there.
Yes. Yes.
It wasn't like nobody was questioning.
Hey, Hank, should I go and...
Did the KKK mean this to be threatening?
Hank, should
no,
I go?
I'm not sure.
I was thinking of after the cross burning, dangling some potential nooses near the church down the street. What do you think? It's vaguely like a noose. What do you think?
Close enough, right?
You know what, Bill? I would go full noose if you're going to go noose, or else somebody might think I was going to use a cord with a loop. What do you think? No, I would use a noose, really. If you're going to do a noose attack.
A potential noose. Is a can of spray paint, is that a potential graffiti?
Yes.
Is a piece of wood a potential burning cross?
Potential noose. There you go. Stanford University.
Noose. Okay.
The provosts have spoken out. The president of the college has spoken out. Everybody has spoken out. So you saw the words. They used the words equity in that story. We believe in equity, inclusion, whatever. So obviously the DEI department used a tractor beam, made some kid say, "That's a noose." Oh, okay, sir. The kid said that's a. So the DEI department then got this thing going, and this is what they're there in the college for, right? So that brings us to.
Well, they have to justify their probably $300,000 salary.
Oh, totally. And this gets us back to what you were talking about last night. Because last night you talked about this story out of Utah that showed that there was
legal scholars were writing to the state.
But medicines were sounding the alarm that stuff was given out, that treatments for COVID were given out based on race, race points. So, and this had happened in Massachusetts as well, under different names, but always you can tell because the word equity's in there. And this had happened in Connecticut as well. So anyway, I just went back. First of all, I looked on the hard drive, if that's what you still call it here, that I've been using for the burn barrel here for the last 2 years. And I just put in equity, just to see what I had there. And it's very interesting. It's, of course, as we knew, everywhere. And they've been very clear about it.
Every White House component and every agency will be involved in this work because advancing equity has to be everyone's job.
Advancing equity has to be everyone's job. Last year, in 2021, as Ned Lamont was trying to spread the vaccines around, once again, he was doing TV hits, proudly declaring it.
If everybody's a priority, nobody's a priority.
You hear that? If everybody's a priority, nobody's a priority.
So we decided to keep it simple, focused on age and equity.
Lamont says a special focus will be made to boost vaccination supply and rates in minority communities.
Allocate extra doses so as many folks from an underserved population are getting vaccinated as in the suburbs.
So essentially, health officials chased Black and Latinx people around communities, neighborhoods, in order to get them vaxxed because the numbers weren't looking good. And then eventually they stopped because the numbers for the whole entire state started to go to hell because there was this logjam because they were
we need to make equity and justice part of what we do every day, today, tomorrow, and every day.
Here's Lamont again in 2021 talking about vaxes.
If we prioritize by age and then had a separate track for the most underserved community, we could get it done quickly, efficiently, and with equity.
Well, they scrapped the second track because that didn't work whatsoever and went eventually for people at risk of dying from COVID, which is probably a smart thing to do. Miguel Cardona, who's the Secretary of Education, also a Connecticut guy.
We're doing an equity summit next week to really get the conversation going about how we can build back better. We have some amazing thinkers and educators from across the country that are going to be discussing best ways to think about equity at the center of reopening schools.
Oh, back to the president.
We need to make the issue of racial equity not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole of government. That's why I issued, on one of the first days, my whole of government executive order that will, for the first time, advance equity for all throughout our federal policies and institutions. It focuses on the full range of communities who have been long underserved and overlooked. People of color, Americans with disabilities, LGBTQ Americans, religious minorities, rural, urban, suburban communities facing persistent poverty.
Here's the Connecticut Board of Education.
We do want to get to a 50-50 level, and what that entails is, getting more females involved into the highly technical trades, You know, we don't want girls to just think that they can come for hairdressing or cosmetology. We want them coming for IT. We want
as a vital component of policies and practices that support equity in our public schools, educational excellence and equity.
What if they like graphic design and hair stuff? What if no? We have to push towards equity. Kamala Harris actually did an ad themed equity.
So there's a big difference between equality and equity. Equality suggests, oh, everyone should get the same amount. The problem with that, not everybody's starting out from the same place.
Yada, yada, yada. You see how that goes.
Right.
So, anyway.
So they didn't give out the same amount of medicine.
Right.
Or investigate things equally for people. They didn't treat people equally, which has always been the principle in this country, is that you do have to treat people equally under the law, not that you have to achieve equity through government, which is not, it's not an outcome that you can ever make happen. You just can't do it. So it always leads to bad outcomes. It always leads to bad outcomes. It led to them having to throw out vaccine doses because, you know, once they started using them, they had to use them up before the end of the day. So, like, that's how I know a lot of people who got vaccinated, because they, like, the liberals that I know were, like, waiting around outside vaccine clinics until the end of the day when they were giving out doses because they couldn't get to everybody, right? So they would start to take people, like, even if you weren't on any of the endangered groups lists or whatever. So it always leads to a mess, right? But it's just incredible, like, the outcry and the freak out if you, like, so much as question a tiny bit of this agenda. The agenda is stupid and it doesn't work. And every time it's put into practice, it's uniformly terrible. But if you, like, push back against it, you're the worst person on planet Earth. And, like, you don't see this anywhere better than with Ron DeSantis, because he absolutely makes people completely deranged. And I sent you this article today, but
hold on. Are you moving off of equity?
I was going to move to the Ron DeSantis.
Well,
article,
hang on one second, because I want you to hear from Ron DeSantis on equity, which I think it completely caps off why we need him to be president.
And they bring a lot of this into those institutions, and they call it equity. Just understand, when you hear equity used, that is just an ability for people to smuggle in their ideology, because we don't need to have these terms.
Perfect.
Yeah. So Ron DeSantis gets it and doesn't buy into this and has chucked a bunch of math textbooks because they focus on teaching this. And more to the point, like, all of this really, I mean, and I know that this is a tired talking point on the right, but it's all communism by another name. It's all, we need to find a way to stop people from, you know, having such different outcomes in life. We need to somehow get everybody to the same outcome, which is just not something that's possible for governments to do. And it always leads to a mess. So Ron DeSantis, the latest freakout is that he dared to create a Victims of Communism Day to teach students the importance of freedom. And I happened on this article by somebody named Kylie Chung, who writes for Jezebel and is a clinically insane person. She's not all right. All of her tweets are, like, about abortion access for Indigenous people, and
of course.
Like, there's every talking point that you can get. Her staff writer Jezebel, pro-abortion, anti-capitalist. So there we go. It's all the same fight. It's all the same argument that we're having, right? So she wrote the following for Jezebel, which is one of the worst publications in America. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will have you know he's a strong proponent of freedom. Within mere weeks of signing legislation to all but prohibit the word gay from being uttered at Florida schools, among a host of other dangerous anti-LGBTQ measures, and trying to pull books out of classrooms for mentioning anything having to do with race, DeSantis on Monday signed a bill to establish November 7th as Victims of Communism Day. This day of remembrance will notably require students to learn the truth about communism, which, according to DeSantis, involves a death toll that exceeds 100 million. I'm sure that random number, which he and other conservatives frequently pull out of thin air, will be easier to push on Florida's youth now that the state has banned all those math textbooks.
This person's nuts.
I think that it's interesting that they don't like to hear about how many people communism killed. when communism has been, I mean, it's killed way more people.
Well, there's a great
than,
line
like,
coming up, I think,
Nazism.
which is perfect, which is every like 15-year-old humanities person in rich towns generally feels this way.
For any impressionable Florida kids that may be reading this, please note that there have never been any true communist countries, owing largely to violent intervention from the U.S. and other
That's right.
Western superpowers. But that hasn't stopped American propagandists and revisionist histories from slapping the label on any country the U.S. doesn't like. No, we're talking about countries that call themselves communists, lady.
But also, this is really 7th grade level debating from some kid who learnt a new word. It's never been tried in the right way. It's never capitalism. Western countries destroyed it. Well, the thing is this: is that when you create a new form of government and reshape society where the government controls the property and the means of production, and you have that either domestically or, as Trotsky wanted to do, you try to export it. You have to contend with the realities that there are other countries and systems of government out there. So I'm sorry that Marx and Trotsky didn't game that out, that there would be other countries that weren't communists out there, but there are.
Right.
So I'm sorry.
And she goes on, and for all the issues that those countries, many of which were subjugated by Western military conquest and colonization for decades, may have, note that not calling an ambulance when on the brink of death because most ambulances don't take insurance, insulin that costs $113 per vial, 13 times the average in comparable countries, and $1.75 trillion in student loan debt crises are all uniquely American experiences. The U.S. is also very much a leader in its populations of unhoused and incarcerated people, many of whom are criminalized for survival crimes stemming from poverty.
Right.
I wonder if any of those quirky little factoids will be discussed in classrooms.
Right. The factoids of the 10 to 20 million people shot by firing squads or purposefully starved to death by communist regimes. I wonder if those factoids will be included in her column here anywhere.
Yeah, how's the pro-choice situation been in China over the last few decades, by the way?
Oh, that's a great column, Alice. I appreciate you. Should we? Okay, well, we will play a couple of messages from the chat. Or do you want to get to more? Or do you want to finish that?
I had one more thing that I wanted to mention, and then
maybe we should punt chat till tomorrow then. There's not a big array of messages anyway.
Okay.
No. So what I'm saying is, guys, we need more. You guys do more chat messages. Leave more messages.
Okay.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to them to tell.
Right.
The
no,
audience.
I know. Okay, so we'll get to chat tomorrow, so then I can read this one more thing, which is that interestingly the
we'll do one chat message.
Okay, but can I do this first? Or
Yes.
No? Okay. So everybody, by the way, has now downloaded the Ultra MAGA talking point. Everything's Ultra MAGA. Nobody's just MAGA anymore. Everybody's Ultra MAGA.
Yes.
So, Politico has this article out about how this Ultra MAGA candidate is now, who wasn't supposed to have a chance, is now polling right alongside Dr. Oz and that other guy in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Oz and this guy David McCormick have spent $25 million on TV ads so far in Pennsylvania for the Republican primary. And this woman has spent $100,000 on ads, and she's, not endorsed by Trump. Oz is endorsed by Trump, and she wasn't supposed to have a chance. But, Oz and McCormick have been beating each other up, and people actually really like her.
Mm-hmm.
She is the product. This is her life story that she goes by when she's in the race, is that she's a product of she could have been aborted, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's a product of rape, whose mother was 11 years old when she was conceived. And she wasn't aborted. As a child, she lived on a pig farm without insulation, and she went on to become a veteran, an adjunct professor of corporate finance, and the author of Nothing to Lose, Everything to Gain, being Black and conservative in America.
Ooh.
So she's a Black woman, and she wasn't supposed to even be a factor in this race, but people just like her, and she's polling up with everybody else. So she has a real shot to be the nominee for a Senate race in a state that could easily go Republican in a swing year like this year is going to be.
Who's the senator? Who's the incumbent?
I think this is an open seat now, isn't it?
Is this Ohio?
No, this is Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. I don't know.
I think it's an open seat because it's Oz, and then it's that other guy, the like big tattoo. The Democrats have that like the lieutenant governor guy.
Oh, okay.
Who's like the big tattooed guy. Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about? I forget his name, but anyway. But I think it's an open seat. So
Well, very cool. Let's try to get her on.
So that's cool. Her name is Kathy Barnett. So she's the latest Ultra MAGA person
Let's look into her.
to look out for.
Let's look into her for tomorrow. That's interesting. I didn't know that, Alice. Thank you. All right, we'll do 2 messages and then out. Okay.
Okay.
Here's the first one.
Hey, Tom, it's me, Jimmy. I don't know what to do to calm Rosalind down. She's throwing shit like crazy.
Man.
Okay, baby, I'm going to dress up like a Power Ranger, but calm down. Oh, my gosh.
That is purporting to be my brother, Jimmy Shattuck. That is not. Jimmy Shattuck probably doesn't know what a Power Ranger is. That is not how he sounds. This is incorrect. This is a slander on the good name of Jimmy Shattuck. Let's see.
Hi, Tom and Alice. This is Phil in Attleboro.
Hey, Phil.
I'm concerned about the next wave of COVID in Massachusetts. And out of an abundance of caution, I'm thinking of opening a neighborhood home school for kindergartners.
Yeah, good idea.
Would you happen to have the contact info for that Bill Ricker kindergarten teacher? I'd love to pick her brain for some teaching hints on equity, diversity, inclusion, social learning theory, and white fragility. Thanks very much. You can call me at I81U812. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. By the way, I'm not sure if we know that person's pronouns, Phil.
Last year I taught entirely remotely, which means all of the parents got to hear all of my teaching, which is very exciting. The other part is that I was teaching remote kindergarten, which is hilarious, by the way. Everyone should try it. And so I did a lesson on white privilege, essentially. I talked about how some people are treated differently based on what they look like.
Sounds good. I will get that information for you, I promise.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. As always, you can leave those chat messages at burnbarrelpodcast.com. There's a red button where you can click to record your message. You can also email us, burnbarrelpodcast@gmail.com, or you can always talk to us.
By the way, we're only racing out of here because we've got to get to half of us to my daughter's softball game and the other half to go pick up food. You needed to know that. I mean, orphans.
And where was I? Twitter @BurnBarrelPod, Facebook.com/BurnBarrelPodcast. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts.
C'est la vie.